A requirement to building jazz lines or walking bass lines as an electric basis is highly dependent upon what you listen to. You see, a good walking bass line works to propel the forward motion that exists in all straight-ahead jazz music. And the place that you really get this is from upright players. One of the first upright bass players that I really studied was Ron Carter. What I want to do today is break down the way Ron would approach playing over the form of the rhythm changes. Now stay with me. We're just starting to learn how to walk through a set of changes. Many people are led to believe that they're just supposed to land on the root at the beginning of every bar and then fill in the remaining space with chord tones or passing tones. But when you listen to Ron Carter's playing, there's deeper things going on melodically underneath the harmony. The musical concept of counterpoint exists when two or more melodies are played together. So if we hear a great walking bass line underneath a soloist, we have counterpoint. This idea relates to jazz in that the bass outlines the harmony while the soloist does the same thing while having the liberty to go outside of the functional harmonic structure to add richness and color. So the secret to a great walking bass line comes from the definition of counterpoint. That's right, the bass line is an independent melody that is woven underneath the harmony. The walking bass line that I'm going to demonstrate isn't a note-for-note transcription, but rather influenced by the type of jazz lines that Ron Carter would play over a set of rhythm changes. Check out how the line I'm playing outlines the harmony perfectly while at the same time reinforcing the groove and the momentum of the swing. If you want to download the PDF of the transcription of this line along with a detailed analysis, then just click in the link in the description box below. Learning to play rhythm changes is one of the challenges when learning to play jazz. The form of this tune is 32 bars long, and it fits into what we call the AABA song structure. This is consisting of a collection of 4 and 8 bar phrases. So if we notice in the first 4 bars, that the harmonic rhythm is 2 beats per chord, and predominantly in the A sections of the rhythm changes, this is what you have. It's what makes it very hard to play over. And what I'm applying is what I call the harmonic rhythm adaptation principle, which basically means that on the strong beats, which are beats 1 and 3, I'm placing either a root or a chord tone, and then on the weak beats, which is beats 2 and 4, I'm placing a chromatic approach note either above or below. Now I break this concept down in my book, Walking Bass Lines, and if you haven't got that book yet, you really should check that out because there's lots of cool things in there. If you look at what I'm doing here in the first bar, is that I'm really just using a basic melodic substitutional principle over the G7, which is playing the A flat, which is the flat 9 on beat 3. And you know, the tempo of this rhythm changes are historically quicker than slower. If you're doing this on a ballad, this might not fare that well because there might be too much space, and you know, the bass player laying on a flat 9 against that root, if it's too slow, might not work. So you have to be a little sensitive when using these type of ideas, but certainly when the tempo is very fast, and again, we're always employing that forward motion to where it's going to, this works very nicely and adds just that little bit of tension. And Ron Carter used to use this stuff all the time. So what I'm using is I'm going the B flat, then I've got a chromatic approach note to the A flat, and then I'm coming back down to the B. Now the B is the third of the G7, which works well, but it's really being heard as a chromatic below into the C. And if you look at the way this sounds, you get that sort of effect. And when it hits that A flat, it's just that little bit of tension there that, you know, is is causing that little bit of uneasiness over that G7, but still works very well as an altered sound. And bass players don't really think about these things that much. They're always so root orientated that they kind of forget or never go near these type of things. But when you really check out the great upright bass players like Ron Carter, Gary Peacock is another favorite of mine, Scotty LaFaro, all these guys were just brilliant at using different ideas to make their walking lines just so much more interesting. So on bar 2, I'm basically, really for the next 3 bars, I'm just employing this harmonic rhythm adaptation principle, or I just basically shorten that to HRA. And so I'm going root, chromatic below the root of the F, chromatic above the D, chromatic above the G, chromatic below the C, chromatic above the F, and then chromatic above the B flat. And that goes into bar 5 of the first A section. When you look at what's going on in bar 5, that's just a triad with a chromatic approach from above that goes into the E flat, which is the next chord. Okay, so the next chord is E flat major 7. I'm just using root 5th, and then what I'm doing is I'm playing a double chromatic approach into the F, which is the 3rd of the D minor 7. Now, a lot of people think, well, how does that kind of work over the E diminished 7 chord? Well, it does work melodically, but your ear is hearing that more as that double chromatic leading. We're always, in jazz especially, we're often listening to where is it going, like where's the resolution of that line going to. Melodically it does work because the E flat is a natural 7 over the diminished chord, which is a tension that's very available on a diminished 7. And then of course the E is the root, but that's not really the way I'm thinking about that. I'm not even thinking about that E chord. I'm just thinking E flat leading me up to the F, which is a nice chromatic line that leads me right into the 3rd of the following chord, which is a D minor 7. Now from here I'm just going 3 down to the root, and then I go root, and then I go back to that HRA principle, which is going the root, chromatic below, into the root, chromatic below, into the root, chromatic below. So the whole line is like this. Okay, so if we take a look at the second A section, what we start off with in the first 2 bars is a little substitutional principle. Now, it goes way beyond the scope of this lesson to get into every combination of what's available to substitute over the rhythm changes, because there's just a huge variety of things that you can do. If you really wanted to get into an in-depth study of the rhythm changes or blues, I mean, you can spend years really getting inside of these 2 song forms to really unlock a lot of the things that you would hear a sort of seasoned jazz guy do. And I'm still working on all this stuff. This is just like an ongoing study for me. But if you look at these first 2 bars, what I did want to share with you is a cool little substitutional principle, and Ron would use these things, periodically within what he would do. And I always liked the way Ron Carter would use substitutions because he wouldn't overdo it. And that's the thing when people learn these things like rhythm changes and blues, and they start to employ these substitutions, is that they just go off into the woods and they're doing every substitution under the sun, and they've forgotten what the original thing was that they were playing. So you have to kind of be tasteful about how you use these things, but they're very available. And what is happening here is that I'm playing, instead of playing the B flat to the G7 to the C minor to the F7, I'm playing a B flat 7 and going down in whole steps. So I'm going B flat 7 for 2 beats, A flat 7 for 2 beats, then F sharp 7 for 2 beats, and then E7 for 2 beats. And then that leads me by a whole step into the D minor 7. So a lot of people would say, well, how does this work as a substitution? Well, for starters, it's a non-diatonic substitution because it doesn't really work within the key of a functional harmonic sort of context. But the thing is, with a lot of these types of substitutions, your ear is hearing where it's going, and it's also based on a structure. And the structure is that we're taking one chord type and we're moving it down in major seconds. So what it gives you is several things. It gives you that whole tone sound, you know, because these things are based on sound. Remember I said, when you look at a walking bass line, this is a melodic statement, and it's a huge mistake for bass players to believe that you know, what they are playing is not melodic. Okay, this is a common error that people make when they're thinking about how, you know, coming up with ideas for bass lines. You know, oh, I'm not doing anything melodic because I'm not a sax player. No, everything you do is melodic, and all the great bass lines that everyone loves, from jazz walking bass lines to just a simple pop bass line, the ones that stick in people's minds are the ones that are the most melodic, okay? So that's just, you know, you want to bear that in mind. So when you look at this, what I'm doing is I'm organizing this as playing in fifths, or playing the root fifth, which basically creates this intervallic structure of fourths, because I'm playing the root down a fifth, down to the fifth, and that creates a structure of a fourth. So, and what I'm doing is I'm breaking this up in playing this down in whole steps, but I'm doing it as like an alternating interval pattern. So I'm going descending here, then ascending, then descending, then ascending, and then resolving to the root of the D minor 7. So, and it just kind of, with those fourths, it widens out the interval a little bit, and it creates this kind of angularity and also just momentary ambiguity to, whoa, what's going on? You know, we're on a bumpy ride now, and then it kind of comes back into that D minor 7, which is a cool little effect. And Ron used to use that all the time. Notice how I go back again to this harmonic rhythm adaptation principle in the next two bars, where I'm just going root, chromatic above to the root, chromatic below to the root, chromatic above to the root, and then chromatic below, and then into the root of the next bar, which would be bar 5 of the second A section. So in this bar, I'm just keeping it simple, and I'm using a principle where I'm repeating notes. Don't feel that you have to play a different note all the time. You can repeat notes. And again, guys like Ron Carter would use this all the time and still does. You know, so here I'm going 2 B flats, then going up to the D, which is the third, then into the root of the E flat, and then to the root of the E. I mean, how more simple can you get? But there's a time and a place to throw things like that in, and also it creates a dynamic in itself by using repeated notes. So, you know, and this is also kind of creating this dynamic direction into the higher register up to the root of the F. So here, when I play this line on the F, this is a common a line that you see all the time, which is a double chromatic down to the 7, then back up to the root. And you see this pattern done all the time in jazz, not only in bass lines, but in solos as well. And then when it goes to the B flat, I go down to the 3rd and then double chromatic to the root. Now, this sets this up nicely when I go into the next section, because when I go into the B section, the harmonic rhythm elongates. We have one chord lasts for 2 bars. And this, again, builds the dynamic tension in a little different way than the A sections do. So there's more space, that kind of occurs here. Sometimes that can be harder to create interesting lines. And this is a classic Ron Carter line over the bridge of the rhythm section. One that he would use quite a lot on different things that he had recorded on. And, I've changed, again, these are not note for note transcriptions, but it's kind of really in the style of Ron Carter. But these are things that I've picked up over the years through transcription. And if you notice that when it goes into this B flat, that's just so nice to go then up another half step into the B natural. And a lot of guys would think, oh yeah, you're going straight into the 6, but those first 2 notes, the B and the G sharp, that would be diatonic above, the diatonic scale note above, to the chromatic approach from below into the 5th. So really, you're not thinking scale so much. You're thinking, well, how can I target that 5th on the 3rd beat? And that works perfectly from that line and creates a melody unto itself when I go from... It's beautiful. And then I use the chromatic above to take me into the 3rd in the next bar. And then what's cool here is he breaks up the intervallic organization to, create, again, a different melodic contour. So he's going 3 down to the 5, which is a major 6. And then it goes up to the root, which is a 4th, and then up to the 5th, which is a perfect, which is a 5th. So the idea is with this interval thing really creates some cool patterns. Moving to the next 2 bars, this is also very cool because instead of playing close intervals now, he's widening this out. And this is a good technique to create a different sort of contour in your lines, and also to create interest, because if you look at a lot of these other lines, they're based between like seconds and thirds. So here now we have these wider interval leaps like a 6 and 4ths and 5ths. And in this, over the G7, this line here goes down in 4ths. And I love that. And that was another kind of trademark of Ron's. He would just go like root, 5th, and then the 9 instead of hitting the root. And again, that 9 as a substitute for 1 is a melodic substitution. So if you were writing for melodic instruments, you would understand that. Or if you were understanding how keyboard players come up with keyboard voicings, these are the rules that they would follow to make things more interesting. So why can't a bass player employ the same thing? So it does work, and you can see this evidence of this in these type of lines. So it's going down in 4ths and then chromatic above into the 3rd, and then it just arpeggiates the triad, going 3, 5, root, 3. Okay, in the second 4 bars of the B section, this goes back to playing these close intervals of minor seconds and major seconds. So he's going, the C, just a chromatic line up to the D and back down to the C. So, which is a great idea over anything, because it's 4 beats and it's targeting back onto that root note, and especially if you've got those 2 bars like that. And again, this is so classic Ron, where you go, so he's playing like the chromatic, double chromatic up to the 9, double chromatic back down to the root, and then from there he plays the 9 and then the 5th and then back up to the 9. Here this leads us into the last 2 bars where it goes into the 5th over the F7, and then he pulls this off to go to the open string. And this again another classic Ron lick, and then double chromatic into the root of the F7 chord, and then just going. So doing the reverse of what he did back on that C7. He's going F, descending double chromatic down to the flat 7, and then back up to the root. And what's great about that is that it leads us into the 5th. Actually, it's not back up to the root. It would be if it stayed on the F7, but it doesn't. It goes back to the next A section, where he goes into the 5th. And again, this is a classic Ron line. And I remember when I first heard this on a record, and I thought, I have to learn that line. That is the line that I have to learn. And when you transcribe things, you have to get excited about stuff. You have to go, that's the thing I want to learn. That particular thing. I want to learn that line. So I did, because it just was so melodic to me and stood out from everything else that I heard. And, you know, what he would do is he'd go 5 down to 1, then it'd be like the double chromatic down to the 3 of the C minor 7, then he'd go down to he'd be like playing like a scale passing run from the E flat, D down to the C. But then by the time that he gets there, you know, that is the 5th of the F7, and then plays a chromatic approach note below the root of the D minor 7. So, and then on the D minor 7, he sequences that phrase. So if you would have watched that video that I did on melodic sequencing, if you haven't, click up here, because that's where you're going to find that. You can do this on bass lines too. In that video, I showed you how to do that, more of a kind of soloistic type thing. But really, you should really be thinking of these things as being cross-applicable to everything you play. He's basically sequencing that, going from the D down to the 5th, then double chromatic to the root of the C minor 7, and then playing, again, repeated notes, chromatically down to the B flat. And of course, you know, that's kind of a cool, almost sort of insinuating the sort of tritone substitution with the F7 to a B root, you know. And notice how he just uses these things sporadically. They're not like all the time. They're just thrown in very tastefully. You know, it's a typical Ron Carter thing. And then again, you know, playing this when it gets to the B flat 7, just repeated notes going down to the 7, and then the 3rd, and then over the E7, you know, it's a 9. Again, 9 is a tension that you can use over the, it's an E diminished 7 chord. And, but again, that line is just, it's propelled by the structure and where it's going to, you know. We all know it's going there. And when it ends there, just playing kind of a more broken rhythm. And then again, using a classic Ron Carter technique, which would be pedal point, where I'm pedaling now the F over those two changes. Even though the chords resolve to the B flat major, I'm just hanging on that 5 because it creates that tension before you go back to the 1 in the top of the next chorus. The goal that you want to be striving for is knowing how to transcend arpeggios and scales in their basic skeleton form and start producing ideas that outline the harmony in a melodic way. You know, there's a lot of people that say imitating other bass players hurts your own creativity, but they're dead wrong. Copying others helps to lead us to our own musical expression. So if you want to learn how to build great walking bass lines, then listening to Ron Carter is a great place to start. If you're interested in becoming a better improvising bass player and learning great musical content from arpeggios to grooves, then subscribe to my channel now. If you like this video today, then be sure to support my channel by giving it a big thumbs up. And if you really like this video, then please check out my books, my membership website, and my Skype lessons. Until next time, practice smart, work hard, and play creatively.